Okay, hello everyone. I'm glad to be here with you. I can't say glad to see you. We wanted to be in person, but unfortunately we decided to finish out the year doing Zooms. But good news, in January, we will go back to live events. So stay posted, check the website regularly to see what we will be doing in the spring of 2022. If you can believe it, that will be the 20th anniversary of Women Alone Together. I really have a hard time believing that, but nonetheless, our 20th year is coming up. I can't believe that we've reached the last program of this year. In some ways, it's gone rapidly, and then in other ways, it seems to have been very slow. But nonetheless, here we are at the end of the year and our most important program, I think. This is something we've been doing for 20 years, and we've been looking at the holidays, thinking about people who have lost a loved one during the previous year. And it's my pleasure today to introduce to you, for you who do not know him, many of you do, my dear friend, Ron Greer, who is a pastoral counselor at Peachtree Road Methodist Church. Ron went to Candler School of Theology. He went to Columbia School of Theology. And before that, he even went to LSU and pulls for that football team. So Ron and gosh, I don't even remember how many years ago it was that we met. But I know that it's been something like 30 years. He has been a part of our lives and a dear friend, but a wise friend. And everyone needs a wise friend. And we are privileged today to have our wise friend, Ron Greer, to come back and talk to us about dealing with loss in the shadow of COVID. We've all lost something during COVID. Some of us have lost more than others when we've lost a dear loved one. And Ron will be discussing this and any other things that you would like to discuss. Please let me remind you to put your questions in chat and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. But now we're going to listen to Ron sharing his wisdom with us. Ron.
Thank you, Carolyn. There are two facets of what Carolyn and I had thought together about bringing to you today. One of them is, as Carolyn said, loss. Directly, what I want to do is, and Carolyn and Steve are going to work on sending this out to each of you who have logged on today, an article that I've written, because I know that some of you have had significant, if not heartbreaking, losses in the last year or two. You have lost family members. Some of you have lost spouses. And I have written an article called The Empty Chair. And Carolyn is going to send that out to you. And I want you to look over it. There are suggestions for you as you engage these first holidays. And there is something about the holidays, and in large part because holidays are a time of gathering. They are a time that we as family gather together, and as friends gather together. And because we are gathering together without someone who was so central to our lives and was so important to us, then that empty chair, it looms so large, it just accentuates and it frames the emptiness. So that has been a tradition of Women Alone Together each year to focus on that. And one of the ways that we're going to do that this year, the way we're going to do that this year, is via the article. And because of the uniqueness of this year being our second year of COVID and continuing to be dealing with that, we're going to be talking about the losses of COVID, but most especially today, I'd like to think with you about how we are returning from COVID. I came across a quote not long ago that read, "God is doing new things, but only those with new minds and hearts and see a new world breaking through the cracks of the old. It's been over a year and a half since COVID overtook our lives and our lifestyles, and we are finally, slowly coming back. It is, of course, like with many things, it is with fits and starts. Now, we were on a roll this summer. We were, in fact, well on our way this summer. Early in the summer, it looked like we were going to be coming back strong and coming back quickly. And then something called the Delta variant invaded our lives, and it said, not so fast there. We are still returning. We are returning, but we have learned that we have to do it slowly. So how do we return? How do we best come back? I have two moments that come to mind, two incidents, two quotes that come to mind when I think of the Delta variant, and they're related with each other. I think of them as bookends. I did my training years and years ago at the Atlanta Psychiatric Clinic, and one day several of us were standing around talking, and one of the therapists there had gone, some years before, had gone through a horrific divorce, and she was talking about the magnitude of her divorce. And she described it in some detail, and then she finished her description with the phrase, she said, and so I simply hit rock bottom. There was a long pause. And then Tom Malone, one of the psychiatrists there at the clinic, said, but isn't it good to know when you hit rock bottom that at the bottom there's a rock? When I think of the pandemic, we as a world have hit rock bottom. In countless ways, each of us have hit rock bottom. Each of us have had times of despair. We've had times of distress, perhaps depression. Certainly, as Carolyn said a moment ago, we have had times of grief, some heartbreaking grief. But when you hit rock bottom, isn't it good to know at the bottom there's a rock? And those of us of faith probably thought of the words of the psalmist, for he is my rock and my salvation. I shall not be greatly moved. It's the first thought that comes to my mind when I think about the effects of the pandemic. And then the second, and again, these are like bookends for me. The second comes from 2008. J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, was invited to speak at the commencement address of Harvard. And Ms. Rowling spoke on the topic of failure. She talked about the time in her life in which she felt like an abject failure. She was just beginning to write what became the Harry Potter series, but she was a single parent without a dime. She was not living on the street, but she was just half a step from being homeless. She technically had a roof over her at night, but she was half a step from homelessness. And this was her quote that she said to the Harvard graduates. She said, and so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I have built the rest of my life. Isn't it good to know that at the bottom there's a rock? We have landed at the bottom of the pandemic. And now it is time for us to use rock bottom as the solid foundation on which we will build the rest of our lives. We can come out of this the stronger and wiser for having been there. And if we do, then we will give this experience a different and a richer meaning. We have dealt with, as I said, the stress, the anxiety, for some, the depression, the loneliness, the grief, the anguish of feeling so out of control. Well, let's make a pact this afternoon, you and me, that we will learn from this experience. We will squeeze every lesson we can out of this to make our lives richer and more meaningful. You and I have read, it is said by numerous people, the world will never go back to the way it was. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. But if it doesn't, if it is going to be different, then let's make sure it's better. If our lives are going to be different, let's make sure they're better. Inch by inch, we are on track for a new beginning. So how do we do it? How do we return? How do we engage this new beginning? How do we start again? Robert Louis Stevenson said, life isn't a matter of being dealt good cards, but of playing a poor hand well. We're going through a pandemic. Let's play it well. Let's not waste it. How do we come back the stronger for having been there? How will this be a new beginning in each of our lives? It's reported by trauma research that after traumatic experiences, that 80% of the people who go through trauma come out of that traumatic experience back to normal within a handful of months. But 10% don't. 10% are still traumatized by the experience. And of course, that's what we call PTSD. But that leaves another 10%. So how do they come out of the trauma? The other 10% grow from it. For them, as it has been said, they don't have PTSD. They have PTG, post-traumatic growth. Let's make sure that that's us. It's, again, to return to the psalmist, it's what the psalmist refers to as moving from strength to strength. There are no simple answers about how we do this, but there is guidance to be used. There's guidance to be offered. This is, let me offer 8 ideas very briefly. And this is where I think of, I read Sanjay Gupta's book, Keep Sharp, earlier this year. And he talked about 5 ideas about keeping your brain sharp. He's a neurologist, of course. He talked about 5 different ways of keeping our brains sharp. And all 5 of them are lessons that each of our mothers taught us when we were children. But Sanjay Gupta tells us why they are important neurologically. And therefore it gives it more meaning, and therefore it gives us more motivation. Let me list 8 ideas about how we move forward, having grown from the experience. And all of these are lessons our mamas taught us, but let me add an extra word or 2 about them. Number 1, as we engage this new beginning, may this new beginning be new. New beginnings. Think about that phrase, new beginnings. The question that comes to my mind is, isn't that redundant? Aren't all beginnings new? No, they're not. In fact, rarely are they new. Most beginnings in most people's lives are actually old beginnings. Same old, as they say. You don't fix what ain't broke. One chapter essentially the same as the one that preceded it. Now, in fairness, for most who remain where they were, chapter after chapter in their lives, this is largely because the previous chapter was well written, it was satisfying, and it seemed to be good enough. I'm not putting them down. But when there is no intentional improvement, when there are no tweaks, then there's no growth, there's no maturation, there's no evolution into an ever-developing self, and something is missing. I have a friend who years ago, she went through extensive surgery, massive surgery, actually, and she was many weeks recuperating. She's one of the brightest women I know, and she did some wonderful reflecting during that time of healing. And she said one of the things that she discovered as she looked over her calendar was of all the things that were on her calendar, so many of them were commitments that she had made to different projects, to different organizations, to different things that she had made at an earlier point in her life. And she just continued doing them because at a point in time, perhaps years before, she had made the commitment and it no longer had the value, it no longer had the richness to it. I come from a small southern town, and the way we put it there is she'd gotten all the juicy fruit out of the gum, but she continued doing it simply because she had made the commitment. She decided that once a quarter, she was going to look over her calendar and she was going to see what on that calendar she wanted to continue, what on her calendar she wanted to discontinue, and what on her calendar she wanted to add. She truly made her life, quarter after quarter, a life of new beginnings. Number 2, may we experience any new beginning with awe and gratitude. We are given the chance to begin a new leg of our journey as we're coming out of this pandemic with promise and opportunity. I love the way Maya Angelou captured this point when she said, "This is a wonderful day. I've never seen this one before." Awe and gratitude. Awe for the possibilities and gratitude for the opportunity. It's a shift in tone. Consider the attitude shift from I should to I can, from I've got to I get to. Awe for the possibilities. Gratitude for the opportunities. Third, as we come out of this pandemic, may we have grown personally. Our question here is, how have we been strengthened by this ordeal? It has been a difficult year and a half. Lord have mercy, it's been a difficult year and a half. I came across a card sometime back that says, the front of the card says, they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Open the card. I should be able to bench press a Buick by now. It has been a difficult year and we have all paid a price. Some have paid dearly. I don't want to have paid that much tuition without having gained the education. Let's not waste this moment. Let's learn from it all this past year has to offer. Let's let this experience of this pandemic be transformative. Let's be open to that happening. This has been a difficult time. We can be strengthened if we will allow it by each of these life struggles. You know, they give a name for everything these days, and the name for that is called growth through adversity. This year has been hard. You've had to engage some challenges. Did you learn more of what you are made of because you have had to reach down and draw on your reserves? Did you learn how to use those strengths to handle those challenging times? Do you return with a greater confidence of what you can handle? Then claim it as a part of who you are and carry that confidence with you into the rest of your life. Next, especially as we are in semi-COVID mode, may we add something purposeful to each day. Decide to do some things that give you purpose in this unique chapter of your life. Use this time you have for something worthwhile. Many of us are still, we're not sheltering in place to be sure, but we're still rather cautious about how often we get out, the size of the crowds, all of those things. There is still more times of privacy. There's still more time at home than we had back 2-3 years ago. Use this time to do something that is worthwhile in your life. It doesn't have to be big. It's simply something that matters to you. I know people who are going through old family photos that they had been wanting to sort through and organize for years. I know of people who are vetting different agencies with whom they might want to volunteer after the COVID era is over. What is it for you? What is it your time that you can find something purposeful in your life? It doesn't have to be big, or it can be big. I have a friend who used the first year of COVID to write a novel. She is sitting right next to me on our screen. It's Carolyn Curry. And if I may go ahead, by the way, spoiler alert, Carolyn wrote a wonderful novel, and it's going to be published next year, and I strongly encourage you to read it. Carolyn wrote this novel and has then done the revisions all during the COVID era. You don't have to write a novel if you like, but you don't have to write a novel, but I encourage you to do something purposeful during this time. Now, if you are continuing to experience angst during COVID, this will distract you from some of the angst, but that's not the point. The point is to get in touch with what gives your life purpose. I enjoyed seeing what someone said on Facebook sometime back. They said, I have always wanted to do a deep cleaning of my house, but I never could because I never had the time. I now realize there must have been another reason. So maybe it won't be a deep cleaning, but make it something purposeful for which you may have never had the time. And for those of you who have experienced depression during this time, let me encourage you to do one thing very specifically in terms of discovering what is purposeful. Make a difference in someone else's life. Now, the old adage has long been the number one treatment for depression, and it still is the most popular treatment for depression, is going out and buying something. And it is hardly the most effective. It is simply distracting. The most effective treatment, other than medical and therapeutic treatments, of course, is to make a difference in someone else's life. I know this is more challenging during COVID because the options are more limited. Perhaps check with your church or with your synagogue to see what opportunities are open. Or think about within your church or synagogue or within your community, who's living alone? Who might deeply appreciate that phone call? Just thinking of you and checking in. One of the single most effective ways of addressing depression is reaching out beyond ourselves in service to another. Make a difference in someone else's life. It truly becomes a win-win. Next, may we keep what we have discovered during this COVID chapter. May we keep what brings meaning to our lives. Another way of growing through this pandemic is to wonder, what did I do that adds to my life that I want to continue, to make permanent? In this way, making it a part of my new beginning. There are two questions that I have raised consistently during the COVID year. The first is, are we doing during this COVID chapter what we will want to keep on doing? do we identify what we are doing during this chapter that we will want to maintain as a part of our lives? What has brought freshness, depth, meaning into your life? What is that? Identify it. Identify it as something that you want permanently, never to forget. With what during the uniqueness of this era have you engaged that when you return, that you will return with an appreciation of it, an awareness of it as you come back? Something has haunted me in a very positive way, and I plan to keep the memory as a metaphor. I was having dinner this summer at the house of friends. I was in conversation with one of my hosts. He asked me if I was writing anything these days, and I told him no, I was not. I told him I had stopped writing during my wife Karen's illness as her condition became more severe. And then in the fall, following her death of last year, I began journaling every morning, not for publication, but for therapy. Not that he asked, but then I kept on talking about the importance of journaling. I spoke for a moment on the sheer emotional beauty of journaling as an experience, of the cathartic, soulful way of pouring thoughts out, pouring feelings out onto a page. How it's a release of what I feel, a clarifying of where I am. I love the way Joan Didion, and I'm paraphrasing her here, but the way Joan Didion says, Joan says, I don't know what I'm thinking till I write it down. There's something beautiful about journaling. It comes from our depths. It comes from our soul. And I told him, and as best I could recall later, these were my exact words, it's pure grace, precious, and so healthy for me. My friend then asked if I still journaled daily. And I said, no, about 3 days a week. And how long do you journal? He asked. Well, it depends on my schedule for the day. Did you hear that? Did you hear what I heard? Yes, I said it. Undeniably, out loud, and in English, I said that what I just acknowledged was pure grace, precious, and so healthy for me. I squeezed into my life, or not, but only as my schedule allowed. Instead of it being one of the centerpieces of my life and fitting the rest around it. What on earth was I thinking? Oh, that's right. I wasn't thinking. I was doing what we all do when we aren't paying attention. I was intuitively drifting back to the familiar, as the patterns of our lives tend to repeat themselves. This time, let's do it differently. Think of it as a ring. What are the jewels in your life? And what is the setting in which they're placed? As we return to our full lives following the pandemic, let's identify what is truly important, what ultimately matters, and keep those as our jewels in the middle of the setting. What have we discovered that we are going to be taking with us? Back to our quote. God is doing new things, but only those with new minds and hearts can see a new world breaking through the cracks of the old. So many have become aware, and this is one of their jewels. So many have become aware of the peacefulness of the quiet during COVID. at a pace unhurried. The scriptures guide us to the awareness of the presence of God when it does. It is with the words, be still and know that I am God. But first, be still. I'm reminded of the delightful cartoon, I've shared it with Carolyn and Bill, delightful cartoon that I came across in the New Yorker. By the way, I have taken the New Yorker for years for the cartoons. Okay. And this wonderful cartoon had this couple sitting on the beach. It was under the umbrella, and it was a husband, apparently a husband and wife. And the wife was speaking to the husband, but you knew exactly what the husband had just said from her response. The wife says to her husband, and this was, I found it in part so hilarious because this was pure Karen and me. The wife says to the husband, we are doing something. You're just not very good at it. So many people during COVID have discovered that doing very little, but being attentive, being still, being intentionally quiet, perhaps in a moment of meditation or contemplative prayer or mindfulness, is one of the most important things of their day. The story is told of a group of tourists in Africa. They were led on an expedition by African natives as their guides and their porters. After the third day, the natives told them they would now need to stop and rest for a day. Well, that made sense to them. They thought the pause was because the guides were tired. But the tourists were told, no, we have walked too far, too fast, and we must wait for our souls to catch up with us.
Like that.
Don't you like that?
Mhm.
So often we go so fast and so far, we need to pause and be still. And that's one of the lessons that countless people have told me over the last year and a half that COVID has taught them to do. Or perhaps the silver lining in this pandemic for you has been something else, but perhaps it's also had to do with different schedules, different calendars, but in some form or fashion, it gave you the freedom to renew. What has it been for you? What has it been for you? What have you discovered that you're going to take with you? Log it, remember it, and never forget. Intentionally engrave it into your life, into your routine, into your heart. Number 6, may we do what we enjoy. During this or any era, let's have some fun. Whatever this is for you, whatever gives you life and energy, what gives you vitality, what feeds your heart and soul. Read that book, call that friend, watch that movie, take an online course, pull out some board games, wipe the dust off the top of the box, and have some fun. Take a walk. Most have reported the pandemic to have been a difficult time, but many are making the absolute most out of it, actually enjoying some of it. To the degree that you can, intentionally become one of these. Now, for many who are at home alone, stay as connected as you can in all the ways you can. But I have a friend who lost her husband years and years ago. And I was talking with her one time about how she had lived such a positive and vibrant life throughout the decades since her husband had died. And she said, and I remember it word for word, she said, I have learned to enjoy the pleasure of my own company. Now, she was very social, but she also enjoyed the connections, the relationships, but she also enjoyed the pleasure of her own company. Do what you enjoy, have some fun, be sure to laugh, If it's not there naturally, then find some way to get funny into your day. It lowers the stress hormone cortisol and it boosts the endorphins. It is a win-win. Next, at all times, but especially in these times, let's remember the fundamentals. Get the basics right and everything else will be easier. These days, of course, it's called self-care. I'm fine with that. You know as well as I do the list of all the ways we best care for ourselves. First, decide that you're going to be intentional and proactive about whatever it is that renews you. Then, eat well, sleep well, exercise well, pray well, stay well in touch with those who matter to you the most. Live with purpose. Develop your community. Be grateful, experience awe, play, have fun, and be true to who you are. All the things that go into the balanced diet of a healthy lifestyle. Remember the basics. Often we get into the nuances of self-care and we forget the fundamentals and we wonder why it's not working. Like beautifully decorating a home and overlooking the fact that the foundation is cracking. Self-care, our problem isn't that we don't know how to do self-care. Our problem, we do. Our problem is, and this is embarrassing, that we just don't do it. Now, we're not alone. I once heard it said, if most of us loved our neighbors as ourselves, we'd be arrested. We tend to be excellent at caring for those who matter for us. We struggle with self-care. You've heard my list of what that includes. I encourage you to make yours. It's time. Let's do it. And finally, may we have grown as we come out of this era. May we have grown in our value of friendship. I told you there were two questions that I have asked repeatedly through the pandemic. The second question I've raised during this year is, what have we missed that we will never take for granted again? What have we had to do without in these many months? We will always want to remember to savor and never, ever, ever take for granted again. Those moments we will always experience as the blessings that they were. There is a lot, like the freedom to get and go out that we're beginning to experience again with our having all of our shots, getting to go out and experience the freedom that we once enjoyed, go out to dinner, take a trip, to be able to put the blooming groceries away after we've been to Publix without having to wipe down everything with those sloppy rags. Those are the blessings that we are experiencing again as we come back. But those aren't the ones I want to highlight. There's only one I want to highlight, front and center, I think, for every one of us. What we have missed and savor is each other. Did you hear Carolyn Curry a few minutes ago? She said that this is our last Zoom. Women Alone Together is going to be back together soon. Next year, face to face, in person. Oh my word, how we have missed each other in this community of Women Alone Together and in your other communities and in your other relationships. We return wanting those with whom we love to be near, to celebrate, with whom we can celebrate our joys, console each other in our sorrows, and just hang out together in the absolute blessing of the relationship. Nothing can replace face-to-face. Nothing can replace looking a friend in the eye and asking, how are you doing? Catch me up. Life is to be lived in relationship. I find it very interesting. Carolyn told you I'm a pastoral counselor. And so for a year, almost exactly a year, I did all of my counseling via a Zoom type platform, an encrypted Zoom type platform. And only then in June of this year was I back face to face. Several of the people that I was seeing in counseling, I had never met before face to face. We had done our entire relationship on Zoom, and it is a really good, and this is the way I refer to it, is it's a really good plan B, but it is plan B. And there is something about, and this is where it is so heightened when I had never met someone before, and I meet them and shake their hand and look into their eyes face to face for the first time. There's a quality about being together in each other's presence. Now, that is even more accentuated when it comes to someone that we love, someone that we are close to, that we enjoy the company of their presence profoundly. We will never take that for granted again. For some reason, and I do not know why, somebody early on in the pandemic used the phrase social distance, and it caught on. Social distance. No, 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 no. It should never been called social distance. It's physical distance. We need to remain as socially, relationally connected as we can, especially during the height of the pandemic. We will never take relationships and being in each other's presence for granted again. Let me take just a very quick side trip. Let's think about loneliness. Two phrases, being alone and being lonely, are two very different things. Being alone, especially these days, refers to those of us who live by ourselves. That's being alone. Being lonely is to feel disconnected and disengaged. And obviously living alone increases one's chances of being lonely, but that doesn't have to be a given. One can be alone even during the height of the COVID time and still remain relatively connected. But first they have to decide intentionally to address it. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm going to do something about it. Next, as it has been said, don't gather more, gather better. Decide what kind of connecting will work best for you in your loneliness. What works for you? How do you connect most meaningfully? Then go for it. A chat on the phone, a cup of tea on the patio, a walk together, lunch, whatever it is, intentionally initiated. And with whom? Who enriches your life? Who energizes you? What relationships feed your very heart and soul? Go for it. Enjoy the company of those friends that are so good for you, and I promise you it goes both ways. They are enriched as well. Find your best ways of reaching out when we're still in the semi-limited confines of the pandemic. Find your best ways of connecting. Connect and stay connected. What have we missed? I'm highlighting this one. We've missed friendships. What else have we missed and will never take for granted again? Please make your list. Make your list and keep it as your permanent record of that for which you will always be profoundly grateful. Okay, it's time to wrap this up. Back when the pandemic started, this was just a month or 2 months into it, I saw a great interview with the country singer Garth Brooks. And Garth was laughing at the fact that every artist in Nashville was feverishly trying to write the first country COVID song. And Garth said he was one of them. And he said he had already had written down the first couple of lines of his song, and it went, "Let's open our eyes and figure this out so we can get back to the lives we all griped about." Well, as we return, I don't hear anyone griping about the lives to which we're returning. For we bring the life lessons we have gained with the new appreciation for the blessings we already had. Someone said so wisely, please hear these words. I think when the dust settles, we will realize how little we need, how very much we actually have, and the true value of human connection. The true value of human connection. We return with an even deeper sense of how much we love each other and how much we value each other's love. It is hardly a new revelation, but having been apart for those many months, we are aware of it as never before, of the true value of human connection. There's something, to me, there's something spiritual about it. I always think of that moment in the book of Genesis as Jacob was being welcomed by his brother Esau. He said, "For truly to have seen your face is like seeing the face of God. With such favor have you received me." As we continue to see fresh faces of those that we love, we'll feel like we're seeing the face of God as we are received and we offer such love and such grace. So as we continue to move back into our lives, welcome back to a new beginning. Carolyn?
I want to say bravo. I know we're all clapping. I'm thinking about what we have said over and over about women alone together. So much of what you've been saying is you've given talks to us about women alone together. We're not alone, we're together with each other. And that's been our premise from the very beginning. And to hear you articulate it in all these ways and the importance is, I've been taking notes, you know, I'm an old student and I always take notes. But I just kept thinking, oh yeah, that's what we've been talking about in Women Alone Together. That's so important. But back to your point of what did we learn from the pandemic? I don't know how many women are like me, but I'm driven by should and ought, as I say. And I think we rush around doing this or that and filling up our time, or we did before COVID. I was particularly guilty of this. And doing a lot of things we didn't really want to do, but we thought we should do it, or we ought to do it, or it was a habit. And I have really come to examine that during COVID. And I'm really going to go up through my calendar and make some changes. And I have been doing that. And I think that's a very positive outcome from this COVID, that our lives were just so frantic. And I think that's the modern era. You know, we've got cars and you can just jump in your car and go somewhere. Now we don't necessarily jump in our cars and go somewhere. We might do it on Zoom. We want to go back to the personal relationships, but I don't think we want to go back to just dashing here and there and filling up our time with unnecessary activity. I don't know if every other women feel that way, but I certainly do. And I definitely feel that it's helped me to realize those things about myself. Um, you know, I had a dear friend, Evelyn Newton, in Kentucky, and some of you've heard me refer to her. She said, you know, Carolyn, you're a human being, not a human doing.
Mhm.
And so often I have become a human doing instead of a human being. And I love that expression. And I think COVID has made us think on all of those things. And I think that's very important. And I'm gonna see if there's,
Carolyn, while you're looking that up, may I comment on what you were
yeah,
saying?
yes,
I think you're spot on. And what you said well is that as we move back into our lives, let's reclaim the parts of the lives that we had and will have. Let's reclaim only the best of it. And let's then bring the best of what we discovered during our COVID era. Like I was using my illustration about the journaling, and then just intuitively, I was going back into not journaling nearly as much, though I had identified how important that was. Let's reclaim the parts of the lives that we had, the very best of the parts of the lives we had. Let's bring the parts of what we have learned in order to have the best of both worlds. And that's what I heard you saying. I think you're spot on.
mhm. And I'm just going back through my notes here and some things that I put a star by. You've said this. I remember, and for you that don't know, Ron was in our very first seminar we had 20 years ago. We met 3 Saturdays in a row, and we really went into depth in some of these things that we're talking about today. And he was particularly talking to a group of women who had recently lost their spouses. And you used that story of the widow who said that she had learned to enjoy the pleasure of my own company. And that has become sort of a mantra for me, even though I'm not a woman alone. I mean, I do have a spouse, but I think just for happiness in life, we need to learn to develop the enjoyment of our own company and not be dependent on somebody else to make us happy. You know,
Yes.
if we can find joy in our own life and peace in our own life, then we're going to be in better relationships with our spouses if we have a spouse, or with our friends and children. We're not, you know, being a victim or leaning on them so much. I mean, I don't exactly know how to put that into words, but
Right. There's what you're saying, Carolyn. May I jump in?
yeah, please.
What you're saying is that there is the words that I think of is that there's a mutuality to the relationship and there's not a dependency to it. That you enjoy the pleasure of their company, you enjoy the pleasure of your own company, and you can enjoy both. You're not dependent on them to have an enriched life. You tap in both ways. Therefore, there's not a dependency on another relationship, because you enjoy and you find meaning and richness in within yourself and within the world outside you, with those relationships that matter. And to me, that's a healthy life.
Well, I certainly feel that way, and I have thought about that a lot during our sessions that we've had with Women Alone. And another point that I had starred here that I wanted to go back to is that we have grown personally and we have been strengthened by some of the adversity. And then what have we learned from it? And I'm a real believer in that old adage that what's you know, if it doesn't kill us, it makes us stronger.
Right, right.
And
Bench press in the Buick. Uh-huh.
yeah, and sometimes, and I think that's a wonderful way to look at life. We do get stronger from our adversity if we can work through it. and not be defeated by it. And but our friend Max Cleland, rest his soul, that passed away just recently, the title of his book, Stronger in the Broken Places.
Right.
And of course, he was a great example of that. But, you know, some people are defeated by their failures and have such a hard time coming back from them. But if they can understand that this can be a learning experience, I can get stronger from this. And, you know, if everything is smooth sailing, nobody's life is really smooth sailing, but I think some people look at somebody else's life and they say that, well, their life is just smooth sailing all the time, and I have all this difficulty. And I mean, if you can look at it differently and realize that everybody has difficulty, and it's how you respond to that difficulty that makes it.
And one of the things that, and I'm going to say it in a little different way, that I am encouraging as we come through and come out of the struggles of the COVID pandemic, is that we log what our life lessons are. That as because I mean, there have been courageous parts of us have had to be tapped into, and we have stepped up to the plate and we have done what we needed to do. And you were talking about the life lessons. What then are the takeaways? How will I learn more, as I said earlier, of what I'm made of, but also how I successfully engage challenges? How did I do that so that at the next challenge, I am ready and prepared and equipped to engage that next challenge, because I learned from how I successfully engaged this one. What are the takeaways? And that to me requires reflection on what this last year and the experience has been like, and what I want to consciously claim, but I've got to be intentional about it, or I'm relying on getting lucky again. I was fortunate in terms of having successfully engaged this one. Now, how do I intentionally successfully engage the next one, the next challenge in my life? And to know how I did that then informs me on how I do it more successfully.
I see that one person commented, I think one thing so many of us have missed is the human touch. Hugging children, holding a friend's hand. And I think that is certainly true, especially if we live alone.
Absolutely. Human touch is human touch. I was referring to looking at each other's face and hearing each other's voice and being each other's present. But that is so true that I also should have mentioned. I'm glad she did. The touch is tremendously important.
And I know when we first got married, my husband Bill said that I had come from a family that weren't huggers. I mean, I do think some families, you know, how the British are known for being very proper and they just don't hug much. And I think that was sort of the way my family was. I mean, we loved each other, but we weren't as much, you know, like I think we think of Italians or something as big huggers. And I come from an English background, I guess you'd say. And Bill's family was always hugging. And but now I've learned to be a hugger.
Go for it, Carolyn.
It is important. And someone else said there's a country song called "Oh Pandemic" by Linda Gale Lewis. Oh, I haven't heard that one. We'll
I
have
haven't
to
either.
that one up. So I imagine there'll be more and more songs coming out about the pandemic. Those are good comments. And somebody said, such a wonderful hour, such a gift. Thank you. And I certainly would concur with that. This has been a gift to us all. And I have been writing everything down, and I'm sure some of our women have, but Ron, you have thought about this a lot, because I know you've mentioned it to me several times, but I just appreciate the thought you've put into it and the sincerity, and how, in light of the fact of what you've gone through in the last year, and you only touched one time about losing your beautiful Karen,
Yes.
who was a dear, dear friend of mine too, has made the COVID pandemic doubly, I mean, indescribably difficult for you and for some of our women too. And when you add that dimension, it has been difficult, but it's coming back, and all of the things you said about COVID, it's learning to live a new way and find joy in your life now and looking to the future is what it's all about for all of us.
Excellent.
And I know that I try to do that. I try to find what can I do today, enjoy this day. It's such a blessing. Gratitude. I'm looking out the window opposite me at the clouds and the beautiful sky that will have a wonderful sunset before long. And each day is a blessing. And if we can just look at life that way and see what we can do to make our presence in the world better for other people. And that is certainly what you have done for us today. So
well, thank you. Thank you. It has been my pleasure to be with you. It always is.
Well, it's always great. We get so much wisdom from you. And I want to remind our women that we'll be continuing some of this conversation in January. We've been trying to get Lisa Schulman for 2 years. She is a neurologist that teaches at the University of Maryland. And she wrote this book, Before and After Loss, about losing her husband, who was also a neurologist, but she's also an expert on the brain and how grief and trauma affect the brain. And it's really cutting edge research that she's involved in. She's a delightful human being. You're going to love her. And she will be with us in person Saturday, January the 29th. And we're going to do a covered dish lunch like we've done for years in the club room here at Park Place. And I'm looking forward to it. And I hope that I will see you all there. And I think, Ron, you're going to plan to come visit with us that day.
I certainly am. And let me underscore, you don't need my recommendation, but the book is superb. I do want to say that it is excellent.
Well, I think so too. And she is a delightful human being, and everyone will enjoy meeting her and asking her questions. And we will be in person again.
Yo.
Hallelujah.
Right.
Okay, and I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. I hope it will be restful and peaceful, whatever you do. Maybe it will be different this year, but take in each moment and make the best of it with whomever you are celebrating. Thank you. And thank you again, Ron.
Yes, indeed. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.